Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I am a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness-based podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. Welcome to the second week of September. I know a lot of you probably have some anxiety as we are approaching our debate tonight. If you are a person who follows politics, even if you are not, it has been all over the news between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And so you probably have a lot on your mind, and you may not be aware that today is World Suicide Prevention Day. As a matter of fact, in Columbus this weekend, there is an Out of the Darkness suicide prevention and awareness walk. So there may be some similar things going on in your communities. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk about this month, last week, we got into self awareness because it is self awareness month. It is also Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And so I wanted to make sure that I gave some space to be able to talk about a topic that I think is still very taboo for a lot of people, uncomfortable for other people. And I think it's just a wee bit confusing. It brings up a wide range of emotions for everyone. But I felt like today would be an appropriate day to talk about the risk and resiliency factors associated with suicide. Most of us probably are at a point, unfortunately, where we are connected, even if it is by a degree or two of separation, with someone who has had suicidal thoughts, engaged in suicidal behaviors, or has completed suicide. And so I want to talk a little bit about why that is and emotionally what it brings up for us, and then of course want to spend some time talking about some resources. Most of the time, as I'm talking to people about suicide, I won't say that there's a top three or top five kind of emotions, but I will tell you that common ones I see are confusion. I think a lot of us just have questions about what has happened in a person's life that they would get to a point of completing suicide or engaging in suicidal behaviors. I think part of that is because we look at people and we make statements such as nothing's that bad. And I think frequently what I've understood from people who are in these places of desperation is that you may only see the part of them that they allow you to see. And so that internal layer or those layers, we've talked about kind of that iceberg analogy where you see the tip, but really the biggest part is underneath the water that cannot necessarily be easily seen. Is all of the things that are going underneath there, and we're confused because we just don't really know exactly what is going on with a person, but also our own beliefs around death and suicide. We have a lot of spiritual and religious beliefs around suicide. We have grown up, I think, some of us to believe that that is a slap in the face of people that we love and care about. And so it brings up anger for us and disappointment, like, how dare you? I think sometimes we feel like I've heard that people are being cowards. They took the easy way out and not understanding for some people just how tortured they are. And so this isn't actually the easy way out for them, because they have been dealing with all of these things that you have no idea of. That can include a variety of things we're going to get into here in a second. But I think that we hold people to this standard of once you reach a certain level, right? Once you reach a certain level of maturity, once you reach a certain level of finances, once you reach a certain level in terms of your status in society, a educational level, achievements, that you're above being in this risk factor. Like, life's good over there where you are. Unfortunately, that is when more stress comes too, as we recognize trying to keep up these images and be for people what or who they think that we are, and also being able to navigate and manage all of the responsibilities that come along with just trying to be a human being in a world that can be very stressful at times. And then that brings up for people this fear, like, who's at risk? Are you at risk? What if you had some suicidal thoughts before? You engaged in some suicidal behaviors. Now, I feel uneasy. I feel as if I'm uncertain about whether or not you're going to be safe. Are other people going to be safe? If this person completed suicide, does that mean other people around me are going to complete suicide? Am I at risk for suicide? So we get that fear and that anxiety comes up. I think for other people, there is a dread because there are people that I'm sure that you all have known someone or known of someone who, to be in the space with them, it's almost like you can feel their pain, the heaviness that is on them, how almost it feels draining almost to be in those spaces with them. They are constantly in some state of angst, and so you dread getting that call. You dread like, if they call me, what are they going to say? Or is it somebody that's going to be calling from their phone, reaching out to me to give me some bad news? Which leads to us feeling very anxious and concerned about whether or not we need to be responsible for this person. I hear that a good bit. People feeling very overwhelmed. If I don't talk to this person, if I don't reach out to this person, if I don't stay in a relationship with this person, are they going to complete suicide? If they've let me know they're struggling, what is my level of responsibility with regard to what I do in that case? Like, okay, they said they want some company. I feel like if I don't go, then something could be happening to them, and I don't want that on my conscience. And so it can breed resentment as well, because now it feels like my life is on this hold, if you will, or that I'm constantly in this push pull with you because I feel this responsibility. And then, so for some people, there is relief when a person completes suicide and they have a lot of guilt about that. Like, this person isn't tortured anymore, that they're not struggling anymore, that all of the demons that it felt like were on them and holding them down, and they weren't living, they were just existing, and life was really painful for them. They don't have to experience that anymore. And I don't have to be on the other side of that waiting for something to happen or feeling like I got to take care of them. And as you can imagine, all of these emotions, we don't know what to do with them. We are trying to understand and navigate suicide ourselves, and so being able to even talk about it culturally is still very taboo for some people to even talk about it. And then there, I think, is the embarrassment and the shame and the wanting to protect people's privacy if you have a loved one who has completed suicide, so that we don't actually talk about in families what happened. If you have a parent that has completed suicide, you were a young child, people try to protect you and shield you from that because they don't want you to feel like you're responsible or you did something that led your parent to complete that suicide. They also feel like they're protecting you maybe from this risk factor. I want you to feel like that's what your life is going to be just because that's what your parents' life was. I think that it is very difficult for us when we're in positions where we feel like we're trying to kind of rescue people and support people and save, if you will, people. And we go and we get all this information and we look up all of these things and we talk to them and tell them why there's so many reasons for them to be living and how life would be without them. And then they still engage in behaviors that are harmful, or they have an attempt, or they end up completing suicide. And so it feels as if to some of us that they're being ungrateful. Like, I'm working harder than you to keep you alive. And you don't even value your life. There's so many people that wish they had the availability to have the support that you have, and you have it, and you're not taking advantage of it. I think that there's also that piece of hurt for us when we wonder if somebody suffered in silence and they never said anything to us, where it's unexpected, this loss. And it feels like it came out of nowhere. And we think to ourselves, like, did I not show you that I loved you, that I cared about you, that you could feel like you could reach out to me, that you weren't alone, that you weren't by yourself? And I think that there is such pain for us because we empathize with the parts of that loved one who felt isolated alone when we're thinking, but you weren't, like I was here. And so then there's that grieving. But I don't want to tarnish this person and talk about them in a negative way, and so I kind of hold on to that. Not really sure what I'm supposed to do with those emotions. I think that there's also this piece of us that gets really irritated when we feel like people are trying to manipulate us by stating if we leave them, if we end a relationship with them, if we don't do what they say, that they're going to harm themselves. And it feels as if they are trying to utilize that as a tool to be able to control us, or if this person we feel like is making these statements, is posting these things, they do it quite frequently and regularly because they want people to feel sorry for them or get attention. And that can be a struggle as well, because what we recognize is that there are a lot of factors that go into people posting that they're feeling like they're harming themselves. And whereas on the one side, for them, it could be like, hey, I'm reaching out to get some help. It also may be indicative of a deeper issue of feeling easily overwhelmed and not knowing how to cope and not knowing how to manage and deal with strong emotional pain. And we'll kind of talk about that as risk factors. It's a good segue to get into that. So, to get into the understanding of the how and the why, like, how does a person end up getting in this place where they would even consider suicide? And what contributes to them engaging in behaviors that could lead to suicide? Much like we talked about, that there's a wide variety of emotions that people experience. There's a wide variety of risk factors. We do know that depression is one of the biggest risk factors. And we've talked about depression before. Depression comes along with some of that stinking thinking. And so there's a lot of negativity and criticism, and there could be self loathing, and everything feeling very heavy, and not feeling motivated to do things, not getting pleasure out of things. And so you're just existing. And it can be a very painful place in that space of being so significantly depressed that you're really not living, you're existing. And then you're in your head and you're thinking, like, if this is going to be my life, if this is literally going to be the best it gets for me, then what is the purpose of me living? I think also that there are just biologically, there are some risk factors, just how we're wired, how our bodies respond to stress. Like, we definitely know that some of us are a little bit more sensitive in terms of how our bodies experience stress. And so when I say sensitive, not meaning that you're a person that gets easily upset by things, but more sensitive in terms of that things affect you on a greater level than they do other people. For example, some people have very high pain tolerances, so they can deal with a lot of pain. Other people don't have as high of a threshold for pain, and so things affect them very intensely, and so they experience things, and their body responds to them, and it's magnified. And so for some people, like, the way that they're wired, it is magnified so that everything is much more intense. It's elevated. So for things we think, oh, that, shouldn't have affected them that way, it does. And then what we've learned is that some of us have genetic vulnerabilities toward being more depressed, toward being more anxious, toward having these factors that would contribute to us feeling more suicidal. Being a male, I'm sorry, fellas, having the male gender is at higher risk. Men tend to complete suicide and by more lethal means. And so we're talking about guns and hanging, more kind of violent mechanisms for harming themselves, ones that often there's not any time to intervene. Whereas someone who may take a pill, we've got some time to get in there, we can pump your stomach, maybe be able to intervene in your life. And so we're also recognizing that if you have chronic illness, if you grew up in a family where there was any type of abuse, if you were corporately punished as a child, and yeah, I grew up in Mississippi, and we got paddlings. It was not uncommon to get spankings, it to be physical for us. And so what we've recognized is, so if you think about what happens when we you got spankings, some of us got, more than spankings, like some people extension cords, like people were beat, right? Like, so you don't get a chance, one, to be able to express anything, because expressing something means that you have the potential to be punished even more. And so you learn to internalize. And what happens when we internalize and we're pushing those emotions down and we're not dealing with them and we have all this pain, and this pain is literally in our bodies. And we've talked a lot about how stress affects our bodies. And so it sets up illness, and it sets up the hopelessness and the despair, right? And these are also risk factors when you are in a place where you have difficulty being able to see options, when you have challenges with problem solving, when you actually do have things that don't have a resolution. Some things are not going to be able to be fixed. Some things are we're talking about chronic illnesses, that, like, I'm not going to be able to get rid of this illness. This is going to be something that I'm going to have. We can talk about illnesses that are debilitating, so progressively, over time, they just get worse. People who that black and white, all or none, very rigid thinking, that is associated with depression as well, because then, right, like, that feeds the hopelessness, and we're very challenged to be able to creatively think about what we might be able to do, or think about who our support system is. Not having a support system is definitely a risk factor. Low self-esteem, feeling helpless, in addition to feeling hopeless. All right, like, yeah, I don't even think anybody can do anything for me, and I've definitely had people feel like I've tried the medications, I've tried the therapy, I've done the physical activity, I've tried to, do the affirmations and listen to the positive things, and I still haven't gotten any better. We also know that the earlier you experience major depressive disorder, that age where you have your first episode, the younger that is, the higher your risk factors are. We also recognize that if you have any substance abuse issues, then that is also a risk factor. We also know that borderline personality disorder, right? And we talk about, like, a lot of those things that we've discussed before, that create that chaotic environment of having low distress tolerance, low emotional regulation, the weight of relationships and chaos in relationships, and that push pull that goes along with that diagnosis, and the elevations in mood and the overreactivity, right? And again, autonomic nervous system just on fire here. Like, those are risk factors. If your parent died early in your childhood, prior to the age of 11, that is a risk factor. If you have someone in your family that completed suicide, that is a risk factor. Financial distress, and we know that we're in a day and age now where everything costs a lot more, but we're not necessarily making more money, and resources are a bit more limited. People who may be on a fixed income, or people who may have less job opportunities because of limited educational backgrounds, or limited ability to even work. I know a lot of people who are in situations where they really qualify for Social Security and should be on Social Security, but it's not enough for them to be able to live on. And so now you're kind of struggling with, how do I manage being able to support myself? What if you are in a situation where you need to wear diapers, or you need medication that is not covered by insurance, or you don't have insurance, right? So some of these factors, again, are more of a burden than I am a benefit. Academic and career stress. I mean, we're seeing a lot of young people who are experiencing suicide because of depression, isolation, the stress, just development, we know that as our young people transition into puberty, there are a lot of other factors that go on. Being able to have a peer support group, being accepted, being loved, being feeling that worthiness and that connection. We know that there's loss that occurs for our young people. So even as they are navigating friendships, we might be friends today, we may not be friends. And now this group that was my peer support group is now talking about me and isolating me. Those early relationships for our young people, particularly if those relationships are ones where they felt safe and that they had a person, and that gave them an identity. So we recognize that whenever we tie our identity to things that may be transitional, whenever we have a transition, then it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to navigate that. And that, speaks to that, being able to have those coping skills and being able to work through the pain and loss and the challenges that come. Being in experiences where you have psychosis, right? And that may be drug induced psychosis, that may be psychosis related to a mental health disorder. It could be a brief psychotic episode, it could be triggered by some trauma. Any of these things put us at high risk. Um, okay, Tarver, like, what am I supposed to do with all this information? One, it is important for you to understand what your risk factors may be. And I tell people that there is no such thing as a person that's not at risk for suicide. Because given the right risk factors, all of us could consider taking our lives. Um, there are things that are very painful and hurtful that folks are facing. You may be in a situation where you're being trafficked currently. You may be in a situation where in domestic violence currently. You may be in a situation where you're about to be homeless. You may be in a situation where um, you are experiencing an illness that is not only going to progress, but you don't have any support to help you get through it. And I think that for all of us, it's easy to say, like, no, even in that, I have my faith, I have. But the truth be told, we don't know that any of these things are guaranteed. And so we're speaking from the place of the privilege of having them. And we're speaking from the place of being able to cognitively see other options. But if those options were taken away, or if I felt like those options were taken away, and this is where despair can creep in, and some of the distortions that come along with the hopelessness and worthlessness associated with depression and some of our other disorders, then that may not necessarily be the case. And so I do encourage everyone to think about what are some of the things that could put me into a place of experiencing such despair, such emotional pain, such heartache, such loneliness, feeling like I'm in the dark, that I've been swallowed into this very dark hole and I can't find my way out. What could be the things that could get me there? Because what I want to do is, while I'm in this wise mind, while I'm in this space of having these amazing people in my life, or my faith, or whatever it may be, that I can make these good decisions about how I would navigate it, how I would navigate a chronic illness, what kind of resources financially I have available to me. God forbid I lose my job, or if some big thing comes up and I have to put myself into a financial debt situation in order to be able to support a kid. God forbid a kid gets sick, and dealing with a lot of illness. And so being able to navigate those things are really important. I think also just being able to have some conversations so that we're talking through our perceptions around suicide, our beliefs around suicide, how suicide is talked about and navigated in our families and our circles. Being able to find safe spaces to open up that dialogue and have conversations, to be able to challenge some of the things that we were taught, so that we are not, right? We talked about rigidity being one of the risk factors. So we're not in such a place where we're so rigid that we don't recognize our risk and don't recognize the risk of other people around us. And so that we're able to be in spaces where we can be supportive, and we also can be supported if we're ever in that place where we have some thoughts. And oftentimes people will tell you they have had fleeting thoughts of suicide. Whether or not they acted on them is different things, right? Because we know ideation is the thoughts. People can have fleeting thoughts. They can be so very quick. Things like, oh, I could just run this car off the side of the road, so I have to go home and deal with my parents being there, or my in-laws, or my children who are driving me bananas, or this stressful job situation, right? And we don't act on it, but it is a fleeting thought. But what keeps it fleeting is that we are able to put those protective factors in place. But it's important for us to be able to talk about that, have safe spaces to be able to talk about it. If you are in a relationship of some kind with a person who is suicidal, because it affects a family too. So we may be in a family. We have a child who is suicidal. We could have a parent who's suicidal, a peer, a sibling. And so being able to navigate that and deal with those feelings of feeling responsible for, or dealing with those feelings of um, perceiving that this person is trying to manipulate you. Like, how do I handle it? How do I be able to navigate all of this, and not feel like I'm personally responsible for keeping this person alive? Because that may not be something that I'm able to do, because I'm only going to be with them at certain times. So how do I ensure that they're getting the skills that they need to be able to have to be able to navigate whether they're with me or not with me? And so that education piece is very important, to be able to fully kind of understand uh, what what is available to you, what's available to this person that you care about. So 988 is just celebrated his birthday. It is a suicide prevention hotline. You can call it, you can text it. It is There's always someone available. So even in the 2 and 3 a.m., in the recesses of when our minds are very active, in the stillness of the night when those thoughts come, you can absolutely reach out to them. The Trevor Project is specifically for our youth who identify as LGBTQ, as we know that they have higher risk factors for suicide because of the potential for rejection, because of the stigma, because of being targeted, because of being outed. All right. So there's a lot that our young people are dealing with, cultural things, spiritual things. And so that resource is 24/7 for them. There is a disaster distress hotline, because what we recognize is, yeah, what if I lose everything? What if there's a fire? What if there's a flood? What if there's a tornado and I literally don't have anything? I don't have family. I don't have other resources. And we talked about that homelessness. Like, how do people get homeless? Sometimes it's through a disaster. And so there's a hotline for that. There's a veterans crisis line that is available, and you can actually even access them through 9882, for our military, as well as those who have served previously. And again, you can text, you can call, to be able to access someone 24 hours a day. The Center for Disease Control has a lot of good information on their website about suicide awareness and prevention. So does the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. They have a suicide prevention program that provides a lot of information, prevention, treatment, being able to get rehab services, things to reduce illness, death, disability, you name it. And it allows people to be able to go to one place and get a variety of resources. Our National Institute of Mental Health, the NIMH, has a lot of information, but they've also done a lot of research on mental health disorders and just the factors that are underneath why people consider suicide. And so it's a good resource if you're trying to gain some information and understanding. There's a National Child Traumatic Stress Network for families to be able to better help their kids, particularly those kids who have experienced trauma in their lives. There is a Suicide Prevention Resource Center that has a lot of information, it's federally supported, and they have some strategies around, like, hey, like, here's some of the things that you can arm your kids with. Here's some of the things that we can arm ourselves with in order for us to get ahead of some of these risk factors and be more preventative. And you all know I like a good prevention. Um, there is community led suicide prevention, and it is a resource for people that are trying to get information and reach out to other folks. So when you're in your church ministries, or you're thinking about your youth groups, or you're thinking about even your own family members, and like, hey, how do we talk about this? We've got risk factors as a family. And we want to be able to raise awareness, or maybe we've lost someone to suicide and we want to be able to talk to other people about it. That community led suicide prevention resource is a great opportunity for you. There is a U.S. Department of Defense Suicide Prevention Office, and they have suicide resources, and they work across all of the branches of the military. So if you are somebody that has a job on a military installation and you're looking for some resources for civilians as well as active duty, then that is a good resource for you. There is a National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, and they have a national strategy for suicide prevention. So they've got a lot of good resources. And then there's the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs Suicide Prevention, which is a VA resource. And that page provides a lot of information about mental health conditions, including suicide prevention, and how veterans can reach out and get the help they need. So, Tarver, why do you talk about this every year? Because I absolutely recognize that if we stop talking about it, then it is going to continue to grow. The more education we have, the more awareness we can provide, the more conversations we're having with our young people, within our families, within our communities, within our churches, the more opportunities we have in order to prevent someone from considering suicide as an option, or intervene early so that we can prevent individuals from completing suicide, and also to be able to help people navigate when they do have a loved one who has completed suicide, and that we get away from that stigma and that shame, and we're able to work through that complicated grief process that comes along with that. So on this day, I encourage you to learn a little bit more, to love a little bit more, and to live a little bit more. Okay? Be well.